For more details on the story, we are being joined by Andrew Leung, an independent strategist who joins us live from Hong Kong. Andrew, first of all, welcome to WION. Now, China is set to pass this new security law for Hong Kong, which is being seen as anti-democratic. Firstly, do Hong Kong's legislators have any say in this at all, in the passing of this law? And will Chinese security agencies and agents be allowed to carry out operations on the ground in Hong Kong?
Well, first of all, I think the whole thing has to be put into a bit of context. Don't forget that under Hong Kong's constitution, the so-called Basic Law, which of course is based on the joint declaration with the UK on the handover of Hong Kong, that Hong Kong's national security has got to be safeguarded by the enactment of so-called Article 23, specifically safeguarding national security against sedition, subversion, and various other kind of activities. But unfortunately, after 23 years, this law has remained unenacted. And in fact, a number of years ago, when an attempt was to enact the law, that sparked off a huge protest, and at the end, it had to be withdrawn. So after 23 years, the safeguard for national security still remains unfulfilled. And now, in recent years, this problem has been highlighted by the massive protests as well as violent activities, some bordering on terrorism. For example, the throwing of petrol bombs, setting fire to police stations, and then causing bodily injury to ordinary citizens, and also, above all, challenging the Beijing sovereignty over Hong Kong by attacking the official organs of Beijing in Hong Kong. So I think, and also increasingly, even as recent as last week, black flags proclaiming Hong Kong's independence have been unfurled, and slogans of self-determination, separatism have become increasingly common. And also, of course, foreign powers are seen openly expressing support for some of these activists, including Joshua Wong, openly, who was invited, quite unprecedented, to address national institutions in the United States. And at the time when there was a across-the-board rivalry and antagonism between the two countries, it's no surprise that Beijing's extremely worried about Hong Kong's this loophole on national security. And since Hong Kong is unable to enact the law because of all this opposition, so as a last resort, Beijing seeks to implement this law. Again, this allowed, at least the mechanisms are concerned, by inserting it into the so-called Annex 3 of the Basic Law in Hong Kong. Now, Annex 3, of course, includes other laws, other national laws, right, proclaimed in China. But the problem, as you highlighted, is that by inserting this into Annex 3, that bypasses the scrutiny of Hong Kong's legislature. Absolutely. To answer your question directly, whether Hong Kong's legislature would have a say, the answer, of course, is not, because it's a national law and Hong Kong is a special administrative region of China, right, and because of the past failure to enact this law, because of the opposition of the so-called pro-democracy activists right, in the legislature, is unlikely to seek agreement of the local legislature.
Right. So you have, let me just ask a follow-up question. Now, you have concern that Hong Kong legislators don't have a say on this. Now, Beijing may have certain legitimate concerns when they're passing this law, but a majority of people of Hong Kong recently turned out on the streets. More than 1 million people were on the streets demanding pro-democracy, if not independence from Beijing. Until now, these pro-democracy protesters were mostly being charged with rioting. But the new law mentions provisions like treason, sedition, subversion. Who will decide what is treason and sedition, or simply wanting more rights? Is the new Chinese law likely to be used to silence these pro-democracy voices in Hong Kong?
Well, let's answer it directly. I mean, the Beijing has already made it quite clear that an enactment of this law will not affect Hong Kong's freedoms of expression, assembly, and so on and so forth. And of course, the one country system would remain intact. However, it's the question of to what extent and in what way the law is being implemented, and in what way Hong Kong's very powerful feature, which is the independence of the Hong Kong judiciary, would have a say in whether or not certain offences can be convicted. Now, I think that there is news coming out suggesting that any kind of enforcement of this law would have to be subject to Hong Kong's laws and safeguarded by Hong Kong judiciary. Now, of course, as to the definition of sedition and subversion, don't forget that many countries in the world, I think including India, and of course the United States, would have such law. Now, how do you define this law, the definition? I think it's a question of course, the intent and also the acts. Whether or not these can be proved according to this initiative, of course, remains to be seen. But I think that according to the latest news coming out, they have to be subject to Hong Kong's own laws, including Hong Kong's judiciary.
Right. Now, Andrew, you know, in 2003, when Hong Kong tried to implement this security law, there was intense backlash on the streets. And we recently saw just last year more than 1 million people on the streets, you know, voicing their concerns, voicing their, you know, demands. Some, of course, these protests, some places were in fact violent as well. Now, China is stepping up aggression against Hong Kong and Taiwan at a time when global support for these territories is increasing. Are we likely to see a rise in pro-democracy protests once again in Hong Kong? And, you know, the world has questioned China's intentions about these new laws for Hong Kong, from the US to the European Union to the UK. Everyone has questioned China on this.
Well, of course, the worry is understandable. I mean, including not only foreign observers, but also the people of Hong Kong. But I think that as the comparison with the anti-extradition bill protests is not really appropriate, in the sense that under the extradition bill, all these offences could be relatively minor. I mean, certain commercial kind of activities, especially involving mainland counterparts, could be used as a kind of excuse. But in this case, we're talking about sedition, subversion, and matters of national security. Now, these charges are much higher threshold. So that's the first point. The second point is that after the massive protests and huge disruption and violence in the streets, months and months of the city's law and order grinding to the halt, I think a lot of the Hong Kong people have got a little bit tired, and also coming to the realization that some of these so-called activists, they are not really just for a democracy, and they're using extreme measures threatening the lives and stability of the economy, which is no good to everybody. So I think that what is most important, what remains to be seen, is to, before the law is enacted, is to see what sort of safeguards is going to be introduced in the law, and also highlighting the role to be played by Hong Kong's internationally respected judiciary.
Right, Andrew, thank you so much for joining us on this broadcast. Certainly all eyes on the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference that is currently underway, and all eyes will be on China, whether in fact this law is passed regarding Hong Kong.